Okay, folks, good evening. Good evening, good evening. This is truly a room full of friends. I've been looking forward to this event so much. I know many of you. I'm Luke Dennis. I'm the station manager here. Welcome tonight. Welcome. Yeah, welcome to our new home. Come on. So we've had a series of events this week. I've enjoyed all of them. Raise your hand if you've already been in the building, I guess. Okay, so now raise your hand if this is your first time in the building. Okay, great. Oh, and I love that this is your first time in the building, the family of Julia. Okay, well, I just have a few brief remarks to kick things off. I've been looking forward to this program very much because I love the history of our radio station. I knew it was special, but I didn't know how special until Neenah started telling me all about it. And I learned, the longer I've been in the public radio system, I've learned just how unique and interesting and special our history is. And tonight is a night to honor that history. WYSO has done a really good job of collecting people and ideas and energy and retaining the best things that we keep in our current identity, right? We just don't sound like other NPR affiliate stations, for the most part, anywhere in this country. And it's because of the men and women and the students who started the station and ran it in the 60s and 70s. That is the flavor that we have retained. So tonight is a night to celebrate that. Yeah, right? It is worth celebrating. And we're not going to change. We're just going to keep that funky flavor. One of the joys of the project has been recognizing people from our past through some named spaces. That's a very common thing when you do a capital project. You name rooms or spaces after folks. And so we're going to kick off the program with an unveiling of one particular space. But there are a few other folks in the room who are so critical and important in our history that there are rooms named after them. So I do want to acknowledge that there's a Carol Pearson editing suite, which I'm delighted about. Carol and Joanne Wallace are legends in our industry. Carol ran the National Federation of Community Broadcasters, got her start at WYSO in the mid-'70s. Joanne Wallace ran KQED for 34 years in San Francisco, worked for NPR and CPB. My office is named the Joanne Wallace General Manager's Office. And that's really cool. Another wonderful thing that happened, and I know I'm going to embarrass him, but everyone knows the name, the Duffy brothers, Dan and Tom and Jim. And they've been with us since the early 70s playing the music that makes our part of the country special, old-time country music and bluegrass music for decades as tireless volunteers. And we asked them for permission to name our music library after the Duffy brothers, so it's the Duffy Brothers Music Library. So I love that. And I don't think I'm missing anyone else who has a room named after them. I did. Don Heinrich is here. Because of Don's generosity, Don Heinrich is a donor from Centerville who believes in us so much that he made an investment, and we asked him if we could name the atrium space in the lobby after him. So that's the Don Heinrich Atrium and Lobby Space. Yeah. And I'm so glad that he likes it and that he can come to parties in that space. Okay, help me out. I don't think I missed anyone else. Okay, good. I want to bring Steve Bognar up here in just a quick moment. So there is a named space here that honors Julia Reichert, and we have a special presentation to kick off the program for that. And I asked Steve if it was okay if I just shared a quick personal thought about Julia. Many of you in the room knew Julia better than I did, but I really did get to know her through my role at WYSO because she was always coming to WYSO and offering to help us think through things, to fundraise better, to go on the air, to lend her expertise, to share her network of people so that we could make programs. And so in 2012, the year that I started at WYSO, we did this multidisciplinary storytelling project called Reinvention Stories. And Neenah's probably going to talk about it, so I won't say much about it. But one of my best WYSO memories, so Steve and Julia came in and taught the staff how to take good still images with a nice camera. I mean, we really had no money, so we bought one nice Canon digital camera that we all shared. And Steve and Julia trained us how to use it because this storytelling project told the stories of families who were reinventing themselves post economic collapse, post recession. And the stories were told through radio, film, and still photography. And not only did they train us on how to kind of use the equipment, they also walked with us in Dayton neighborhoods where they were hoping to find stories that could be part of the reinvention series. And I got assigned to Julia's group, and we walked through South Park together. And you guys know, you knew Julia, so she could talk to anyone with such a warmth and a smile, and she was fearless. And we walked through a neighborhood in South Park, and every person we saw, she would hand them a flyer and ask them if they had a story of reinvention. And then she would ask for permission to take their photo. One woman invited us into her living room, and we sat, and I got to watch Julia. She said very little. She listened, and she honored this woman's story in her living room. And I think that person became one of the featured stories in that series. But in that moment, she showed me everything that public radio is about. The way that you care so deeply about listening to other people's stories, and you find ways to share your platform so that their story can get out in the world and maybe develop a little bit of empathy or connection with some other people. So that's one of my many Julia memories. And I'm so glad that we're able to honor her tonight. So Steve Bognar, her partner in life and creativity, is here to, I'm going to hand the mic over to you, and I'll assist with whatever you need. But you guys all know Steve Bognar. Give him a welcome.
She showed up at Antioch College scared, fighting a strong sense that she did not belong at such a great school. She felt like an imposter, the first person in her working class family to go to college. The man who interviewed her for Antioch admissions wrote, "She won't offer much unique, but she'll make excellent filler." After 2 years of feeling inadequate, she dropped out of Antioch. She hitchhiked across the country, worked different jobs, waitress, receptionist. It was 1968. The country was on fire with the Vietnam War and the assassinations of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy. Julia resolved to try Antioch again. When she returned to Yellow Springs, she met Jim Klein, a nerdy student, a nice Jewish boy from Long Island. They fell in love, and Jim gave Julia some much-needed support and encouragement. Jim was already a radio geek. He had discovered this tiny little hole-in-the-wall, 10-watt student-run station in the second floor of the Student Union, WYSO. Julia started hanging out there also, and she felt the pull of this place. She learned audio recording, how to cut tape, mixing sound, and putting it together, telling a story in a time frame. She loved it. This place gave her direction. Years later, Julia said it unequivocally. The skills she learned that she would use for the rest of her life as a filmmaker, most of those skills she learned right here at this station. In 1969, Julia started her own radio show, The Single Girl, quite possibly, maybe probably the first feminist radio show in the country. She also worked at WYSO as the news manager, the news director. She was an Antioch co-op student at the time. The manager of the station, Tim Mabey, wrote in her evaluation that Julia, quote, Julia developed practically on her own initiative the WYSO news program. She trained and directed about 10 students and several outsiders in the writing, compiling, taping, interviewing, and announcing involved. Julia didn't always know like how to do things, but she never let that stop her. She pushed forward. She would rally other people. She operated out of a deep moral sense of right and wrong and urgency, a need, like what needed to be done had to be done. She did that at WYSO. She did that in the films for years that she made with Jim and later with me. In the early 1990s, Julia would come to WYSO during Around the Fringe because she would bring her 12-year-old daughter, Leela, to meet up with Leela's friend Anna, who was the stepdaughter of Rev Cool. And these 12-year-olds would run around the student union and WYSO together. In 2002, when the station got rid of almost all its local music programs, including Women in Music and Jazz, Julia became one of the leaders in the Keep WYSO local movement. It became like a part-time job, this fight, this battle that we were in. And for Julia, it caused her a lot of physical stress and many sleepless nights. But she loved this station, and she had to fight for it. We had radios on, tuned to WYSO in almost every room in our house. It's true. Julia would be cooking dinner, listening to Shakin' Dave's Blues Show, or Basim Blunt's Behind the Groove, or Dave Barber's jazz shows. She'd often stop cooking and call these guys just to tell them how much she loved what they were playing that night. As Luke mentioned, we had another chance to work with WYSO starting in 2011 when Neenah said, let's do reinvention stories together. And these stories we told over 30 people's, we made 30 portraits of Daytonians starting over in radio and film. And as we went out, Julia gave us all a rule. We have to meet people in the world, like in their neighborhoods. No phone calling, no asking friends, hey, do you know anyone in Trotwood who we could get? None of that. We had to encounter people in real life. And we were going to ask them right then and there, on their porch, on the street. We had to do the pitch. Hi, we're doing a radio project. Can we talk to you? You know, and we were nervous. It was exhilarating. And Julia loved every minute of it. If she were here, I think Julia would look around this amazing station. She'd look at you, Luke. Where's Luke? She'd look at you and say, good job. But she'd also say, don't let these fancy new digs go to your head. There is grandeur in this place, but grandeur can be dangerous because grandeur can make you cautious. Grandeur can take away your playfulness and some of your creativity. So just beware. Julia would also say, I believe, even though this station has now moved across town, don't lose the connection to Antioch, to the mother of this station. Absolutely. I think Julia would love Lee Wade's wonderful show, Translucent, and she would love just as much the fact that Lee started working at the station as an Antioch co-op student. Keep the connection strong. A few weeks before she died, Julia was in hospice and she was visited by Sarah Woodhull. Sarah said, WYSO would like to honor you, Julia, by naming the new newsroom after you. Julia was deeply, deeply moved. Our family, Leela, our granddaughter Dory, Jim, Julia's mother-in-law, Andre, our whole family and deep friends for many years, we're all so grateful for this remembrance. And we're grateful that WYSO and Sarah, you had the grace and the wisdom of the heart to find Julia and let her know this before in the last weeks of her life. To have gone from a scared working class kid feeling like an imposter to discovering a love for radio journalism and filmmaking, documentary, to finding her voice in every way. and to reach a day when WYSO would want to remember her in this way means more to us than words can say. Thank you. So I'd like to invite Leela, Julia's daughter, and Dory, Julia's granddaughter, up here, and we're going to unveil this plaque. Okay, so Dory, if you want to come up here. Thank you. Okay, I guess we'll do like a countdown, I guess. 5, 4, I think we have, you know how to do it. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you. So it is now my honor to introduce Jocelyn Robinson. Luke, can I ask you to do, okay. We are lucky that Jocelyn's going to come up here. Jocelyn is the Director of Radio Preservation and the Archives here at WYSO and HBCU Radio Preservation Project Director. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thanks. I'm a Convoxer, a proud member of the class of 2013. I'm a producer and a preservationist, and as the Director of Radio Preservation and Archives at WYSO, I have a really fun, and I tell people all the time, I have the best job in the world. And also as the founder and director of the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a sec, I get to spread the gospel of what we do here. So along with our mission and vision here at WYSO, there are 6 guiding principles. They are relationships, equity, independence, trustworthy journalism, education and lifelong learning, and preservation. We explicitly state that preservation of the records of conversations, cultural events, news, and decisions that shape our station, our community, and sometimes the world is a form of public service. The WYSO Archives ensures that people in the region we serve and beyond have access to these primary sources. So let me tell you how we're doing that here at the station. It's more than just archives. So we've developed a Center for Radio Preservation and Archives, and under that umbrella, we have 4 distinct elements. First, we have the WYSO Archives itself, with media spanning from the first broadcast on February 8, 1958, to the present moment, including nearly 5,000 obsolete and at-risk audio assets, 3,229 open reel tapes, 609 cassettes, and hundreds of continuous loop cartridges, digital audio tapes or DATs, mini discs, floppy disks, CDs, and other media. And of this material, about half of the quarter-inch tapes, mostly those originally produced here at WYSO, have been reformatted or digitized through the efforts of the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, beginning with a pilot project back in 2009 when Neenah first arrived as the station's GM. At that time, our collection was cataloged and about 300 hours of tape was digitized. Late last year, with AAPB support, the remainder of the locally produced tapes were sent out for reformatting, and those reels of tapes have just been returned to us within the past few weeks, 54 boxes of them, and are now in repose in the climate-controlled Edward H. Richard Radio Archives collection. They are arranged in the same order they held back in the tape library on the 2nd floor of the Antioch Student Union. The resulting digital files will soon be accessible through the AAPB website at americanarchive.org. Many of the DATs and cassettes produced over the years have also been digitized, but in-house, and they too will soon be accessible for listening. Now, we also have about 250,000 born digital assets created over the decades in the switch from analog to digital, which includes scores of files that are being created every day. And that's a lot of media. It's really mind-blowing. So we plan to have a DAMS, a digital asset management system, in the near future to organize and care for this material. This will make almost our entire collection accessible to all. Right now, it's a pretty labor-intensive task to find a single recording, almost a needle in a haystack. So rest assured, we're working on it. But there's more than audio. We have well over 500 photographs, plus negatives, slides, posters, artwork, news clippings, video, lots of awards, because it's WYSO after all, and station ephemera, like bumper stickers, t-shirts, tote bags, and mugs in the collection. All of that needs cared for too. Much of this material is being scanned or photographed and will also be digitally accessible, including the program guide collection that dates back to the very first days of operation, thanks to a generous gift from former Women in Music program host Pam Conine. Like all archives, we have a backlog. That makes us official. There's unprocessed material dropped off at the station through the years, boxes of media and memorabilia from folks like Dave Barber, Susan Streeter Carpenter, John Fox, John McChesney, and Julia Reichert too. As more of WYSO's history slowly finds its way to us, we welcome conversations about adding to the collection. We even have a deed of gift now. Our second element is rediscovered radio. That's the storytelling created since 2013 using this historical material. There's the radio broadcast series, there are specials and web posts, and our podcast, Women's Voices, Women's Music in the WYSO archives. Music director Juliet Frumholt and I have had the joy of taking a deep dive into WYSO's historical materials to rediscover and amplify the sounds of women found in the collection, including Joanne and Carol, and of course Julia. And you can hear their stories in the first episode. At WYSO, we're so honored to be part of what shaped Julia Reichert, who we honor this evening. In that first podcast episode, we learn, through a conversation between Neenah and Julia, how feminism and WYSO combine to show Julia her power as a media maker. She says it so clearly and so beautifully, so you'll hear. Please give our full podcast a listen if you get a chance. So because WYSO's history is so entwined with village history, the center's third element is housing the Yellow Springs Civil Rights Oral History Collection, with over 50 interviews and growing. These oral histories are reflected in our Community Voices series, Loud as the Rolling Sea, stewarded by Dr. Kevin Magruder, Antioch history professor, ComVoxer, and member of both the Miami Valley Public Media Board and the HBCU Radio Preservation Project's advisory group. These oral histories are an important and instructive adjunct to the archives collection, especially now. And then there's our fourth element, the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, a nationally recognized model for radio preservation inspired by WYSO. The project has been in existence since 2017, and with generous funding from the Mellon Foundation, we've been working with about 30 Black college radio stations to protect and honor their legacies through media preservation and oral history gathering. You can scan the QR code outside our office on the lower level to visit the project's brand new website and learn more about this sacred work. In collaboration with our partners at the Northeast Document Conservation Center in Andover, Massachusetts, we've designed a replicable preservation model that can serve not only HBCUs, but all college radio stations and tribal stations, rural stations, and other public and community stations. And it's all based on what we've learned growing and developing the WYSO collection. This work constitutes a collaborative template of radio preservation that positions WYSO as a national leader with awards and recognition from both the archives and public history communities to show for it. So that's the Center for Radio Preservation and Archives. We've been slowly but steadily building administrative infrastructure, developing collections policies, and instituting preservation best practices to care for this material and make it accessible to researchers and scholars, media producers, to our own staff, and to all of you. It's a work in progress, but progress is certainly being made. So with our move here to the Union Schoolhouse, we have a dedicated physical space for all of these activities, But the WYSO Archives is the root of the Center for Radio Preservation and Archives, the seed planted 68 years ago by Ed Richard, Terry Herndon, and Hal Roth, then nurtured and tended first by Antioch students like Jim Klein and Julia Reichert, and later by devoted community members and staff, beginning with Joanne Wallace and Carol Pearson and so many others. It's still growing, and it's flourishing. If there's one thing I can tell you tonight, it is preservation is resistance. The lessons of the past are still here for us to study and learn from as we meet the current moment. I think we'll learn about some of those lessons in the conversations yet to come this evening. So you can reach out to me with questions and stay tuned for more from the Center for Radio Preservation and Archives. Thanks. So at this point, I'm going to pass the mic to none other than Neenah Ellis.
Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I'm Neenah Ellis, and as Luke mentioned, I have been just totally transfixed by the history of WYSO. I have myself a long history in radio. My parents were in commercial radio. They literally had a mom and pop radio station, and I grew up in a radio station. My dad was on the radio from 1948 until the year 2000. So, I mean, if you can be born into radio, that was my story. In 1980-ish, I went to National Public Radio, and I started hearing stories about this little radio station in Yellow Springs, Ohio. I met Joanne and her partner, John McChesney. They were working at NPR at the time. Other producers who had been here were at NPR, and I was just hearing over and over about this little station. And over the years, things developed. My husband, Noah Adams, came here when the station was still in the student union to help them fundraise, and he came back and he said, I think we're going to live in Yellow Springs someday. And I said, where? What? And it just went on from there. I met Julia and Steve in the early 90s. And, you know, one thing led to another. The job came open. I never imagined that I would be a manager of a public radio station, but Julia was one of a handful of people who convinced me to come here. So I feel tonight is very emotional for me because Julia was so important in convincing me that I could do it. Isn't that just Julia, right? You can do this. Come and do this. Come and take part in this historical situation here, because it was clearly in a crisis. WYSO was at a crisis. Keep WYSO Local had emerged because of a lack of support within the university system, because dwindling dollars from listeners, it was just kind of in bad shape. Okay, we don't have to go into that too much. It was not in good shape. But, and I'm like, there's no place to go but up, right? And I knew because of these people that the history here was so powerful and so important to people. So I knew that it could come back, right? You can't buy that, right? So I came in and we just took off, right? There was so much that needed to be done to reconnect us with those past traditions. So it's really thrilling for me to be able to, you know, talk about this with you all tonight and explain and hear from these folks who were here well before I was about what they thought they were doing at that time, right? And why things emerged the way they did. They were really tumultuous times in the 60s and 70s. Some of you remember that. And WYSO was kind of born into that fire that was happening in this country. But I want to go back just a little bit. You've heard us talk about the founders, right? 3 Antioch College students. They call themselves radio nerds. They were engineering students, and I don't know what Ed was, I think he was a literature major, but they weren't radio people, right? They just loved radio. And they decided that they wanted a radio station. I'm not going to say too much more. I'm going to play you some tape of these 3 guys, right? Their names were Hal Roth, Terry Herndon, and the first voice you're going to hear is Ed Richard. He's the only one of the 3 that's still alive. So let's hear now that tape.
Nothing was impossible. We overcame every obstacle, and there were so many obstacles in the way. But we were going to do it, and we did it. The 3 key people from the student side, Terry Herndon, who was our technical guy and just amazing guy, and Hal Roth, who was a colleague and friend and student who went on to great career in radio, and myself, we were the people who sort of put the station together. Antioch College had a long history of radio. Back in the 30s, the students started could be classified as an illegal radio station called WABS, the Antioch Broadcasting System.
WABS was an AM station. It was a wired radio station. You send the signals by wires that are hooked into the electrical system of North Hall, South Hall, and the science building. And you can hear it on any of the radios that are in the rooms. But go 30 or 40 feet away from the building and you can't hear it. That's how we started out. My name is Terry Herndon. I spent a number of hot Saturday afternoons crawling through pipe tunnels under the campus. This was from the steam plant that was down across the railroad track on main front campus. It brought the steam lines to all of the dormitories, which were heated by steam. So we strung the wires around through these. It was full of spiders, it was full of hot steam, and it wasn't much fun, but it wasn't that bad either. So once we got that done, we had built a transmitter and just had basically a turntable, a microphone, a volume control. This was just turntables playing music run by kids.
At that time, an announcement came out that the Federal Communications Commission was giving FM call letters to nonprofits. FM at that point was relatively new and was not successful. And several of us got together one night in the old cafeteria and said, hey, we need a radio station.
How crazy was it to want to have an FM station back then?
Oh, it was really fairly crazy because FM was just coming in across the country. It was a different way of doing it, and the thing that FM had as a talking point is you didn't have static electricity on it. AM radios broadcasting through the air, you'd have a lightning storm and you'd have nothing but static. With FM, that went away, and that made FM become more popular in the entire country.
And that's sort of how it started. We were tired of crawling through tunnels, repairing wires. We knew we had a station that any day we could be shut down if an FCC van came through and found this illegal station operating. And it was a great station, by the way. People like Rod Serling worked at WABS. Great people worked at WABS. But it was a very difficult thing to run, and it was all volunteer. We had no money. I think Community Council gave us $1,500 a year, and we ran the radio station on that.
Okay, well, I wrote up a little thing about 60 seconds or less.
Perfect.
I can read that. I'll run through that, and then if that doesn't work, we can try something different.
That's perfect. Go ahead anytime.
Okay, this is take one. Hello, I have a question for you. Were you listening to WYSO 51 years ago? Probably not, but I was. My name is Harold Roth, and I was one of the 3 students at Antioch College in 1957 who planned and built this FM station. The first broadcast of WYSO was in February 1958.
Good evening. At this time, Antioch College begins its first official transmission on FM. This is station WYSO, owned and operated by Antioch College, Yellow Springs, Ohio, with studios and transmitter on the campus of Antioch College, operating on a frequency of 91.5 megacycles by authority of the Federal Communications Commission. For its first program, the Antioch Broadcasting System will bring you the official opening and formal dedication of its facilities in the Antioch Union.
WYSO has begun broadcasting on this first evening at 7:30 p.m. to bring you the dedication and formal opening of this station. Our regular schedule will be each evening of the week from 8 p.m. to 12:05 a.m. and on Sundays from 3 to 5 p.m. Until our regular sign-on at 7:56 this evening, we bring you now Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings, Charles Wunsch conducting the strings of the Boston Symphony.
Dear listener, this will be your radio station. Our policy states its programs will be of a nature not generally available in the listening area and shall emphasize the education and/or entertainment of the listening audience. But there is another point we wish to emphasize, and that is that this will be a community radio station. We cannot expect to sit up here in our ivory tower and put programs on the air without considering the needs and desires of our audience. We hope you will enjoy this, our first schedule. What it will be in the months to come is up to you. Let us know how we can make this a true community radio station.
How does it feel do you remember writing that?
Yes. It was 3 of us very tired right before we went on. And I think this was in our first program guide. We were very young. There was no mountain that we couldn't climb, no river we couldn't cross. We were starry-eyed, and somehow these dreams turned into incredible realities.
Ed really wanted to be here tonight. Until recently, he had planned to be here, but he couldn't. We did, though. Luke talked to him this afternoon, and he recorded a message for us. So we're going to play that little brief message.
Congratulations on the new chapter that WYSO is now embarking upon. I wanted very badly to be with you today and during this week for your opening celebrations, but sometimes life has other plans. I will visit as soon as I'm able. I promise that. But in the meantime, I hope the entire WYSO team can take a deep breath and enjoy your accomplishments. The strength of WYSO today is the result of decades of stewardship and care. I want to offer my thanks to the many, many folks who have cared for the station since we went on the air in 1958. Thousands of people started their careers in broadcasting at WYSO, many of whom have come back to pay us visits, and many of them are here today with us, joining in the celebration of this magnificent station that started from the tiny little one that I mentioned. I also want to pay very high attention and give great regard to Luke Dennis, our general manager, who has worked tirelessly to bring the new station, based on the old 1958 station, into existence. We never dreamed that we would be in such extensive and magnificent facilities as we have today. This is unbelievable. I also wish to pay very great deal of attention to Neenah Ellis, who preceded Luke Dellis in the position as general manager of the station. Neenah is and was incredible in bringing WYSO forward. She is an amazing person, and without Neenah, without Luke, without so many other people, this station would not have been possible. I also wish to go back to pay homage again to my very close friends who are not with us in person, but I'm sure are aware of what we're doing. Terry Herndon and Hal Roth. This could not have been done without them as we moved along to create this station.
That was Ed today, just a couple hours ago. So that was 1958. The 60s came on pretty fast. And what you heard on WYSO in those days was a lot of music and not so much news and public affairs. That kind of crept in later on. The students were involved in the 60s, doing a lot of technical things mostly. But in the late 60s, the Vietnam War was ramping up and the students were getting really restless, right? Really restless. So let's go now to segment 2, and we're going to hear Jim Klein and Julia Reichert talking about their experiences when they started in at WYSO. And then we'll talk to Jim.
WYSO changed my life. I came to Antioch as a music major and a very tentative person, didn't know how to relate to people and stuff, and I really had no idea where my life was really going. My name is Jim Klein. My formal name's James Klein, but people call me Jim Klein. And I only worked at the station as a student co-op for 3 months, actually, in the winter of 1969. But I was very involved with the station and working and even training people who were on the air after that and extending for the next about 5 years. In my freshman dorm as a senior, as a fifth-year student, was Jay Tuck.
You're listening to the radio voice of Antioch College, WYSO, at 91.5 on FM. No, that's not right. The frequency's changed. You see, I haven't worked here since 1967. My name is Jay Tuck, and I was the general manager of WYSO back then, 1967. WYSO was a pretty conservative affair back then. Classical music, folk music, and jazz, plus a lot of discussions and some foreign language stuff. But don't get me wrong. WYSO was not about success with a commercial voice, nor was it about play or rock and roll. WYSO was always a serious broadcaster in Southern Ohio with a good reputation. It was the Vietnam years, serious times, both for Antioch and for its college FM station.
There's some people up here demonstrating against the war in Vietnam. Do you think they should be allowed to demonstrate here?
They're crazy. They should be over there themselves. They ain't got no right to picket this place. I'm 100% against it. And I'm a young man. If he's called me to go over and fight
And really, I sort of fell in love with the technique of audio and of radio during that time.
I remember you had to go through this little training program, and Jimmy is who did it. And he and I were in a film class together. And he worked at the radio station, and I went over there and was really fascinated with all that you could do so easily and quickly. And so I started working in radio too. Because I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a journalist because I thought if people just knew the truth, there would be peace in the world. If people really understood each other, that's more what I mean. There would be peace in the world. Of course, we know that's not true, but that's what I thought. My name is Julia Reichert. This is the era of the People's News. The People's News. And I believe I was the People's News director, maybe, or certainly I worked on it. I think I was the news director. What happened there is there was a thing called the Radical Studies Institute, RSI, Radical Studies Institute. And they were people who went to peace demonstrations and fought for civil rights and all that. They were faculty and there were some students involved. They wanted to start a news show. And they went to the professional manager, whose name was Dick Barton. He had one of those very smooth voices, one of those radio voices. And at that point, WYSO was not on the air maybe 5 hours a day. And it played like classical music, and it had like these news programs that were sent around on tapes, like collegiate news. It was not very dynamic, honestly, nor was it very connected to the community at that time. So nothing was very local. So these folks from RSI, Radical Studies Institute, came to Dick Barton and said, we would like to have a news program, and call it the People's News. And he was doubtful, because they didn't know anything about radio. They didn't know how to, edit tape or announce or anything. So young Jim Klein was the student who trained people. So he actually trained a bunch of people, me included.
And there was tremendous excitement. There was just, all of a sudden, there were dozens of people working on this show.
This is WYSO People's News. As predicted by various news commentators over the weekend, President Nixon has changed his line of defense against impeachment and removal.
The People's News for Thursday, August 14th. I'm Willa Seidenberg with Mark Cohen.
Interest rates are on the rise again.
Tomorrow is income tax day. Some people don't want to pay, and you'll hear why.
And with the space shuttle safely returned, we'll look at some other programs envisioned by NASA.
This is the People's News for Tuesday, April 14. I'm Eric Bates with Marcia Sauer.
This is the People's News from Monday, May the 2nd. I'm Marvin Thorson.
I'm Lauren Battaglia with Eric Bates. We'd also like to inform you that there's a tornado watch on for this area till 7.
It came to pass that students became the managers. It became a student station. And this is where we entered into a period of great experimentation.
And it became this very, very open place with like a philosophy that anybody who had anything to say could sign up for a block of time.
You could sign up for an hour or two and just do something. And some of it was political, like the People's News. A lot of it was experimental. Somebody would play just some music they would like. At some point along the way, I started the women's radio show. I think that was I'm almost sure that was in '69, which was called The Single Girl at first for one quarter, and then I called it, after I realized girl was not the it shows, I used the Peter, Paul and Mary song that Mary sang, Wish I Was a Single Girl Again, as my theme song. And then I examined like the Rolling Stones songs or women singing blues songs, that, I'm suffering for my man, and the Rolling Stones, Get Off My Cloud, and then talking about what is that saying about women and how we're viewed and all that.
Wish I was a single girl again.
The Single Girl is an hour of music and commentary focusing on the problems of women today. I'm Julia Reichert on WYSO FM 91.5 in Yellow Springs, Ohio. We'll start tonight with a song that I've liked for a long time. It's called Michael from Mountains. The man described in the song used to represent a sort of ideal to me. A very romantic ideal, of course, but still I envied the woman who could have a relationship with such a sensitive, affectionate man. Recently, though, I've changed my mind. Let's listen to Judy Collins singing Michael from Mountains.
WYSO is where I learned my craft. WYSO is where I learned how to edit, how to record, how to write narration, how to speak on the air, how to make a story happen, beginning, middle, and end, how to work to a deadline. No, I'm not very good at that. It all totally started at WYSO. If it hadn't been for WYSO, I wouldn't be a filmmaker. I'm completely sure about that. WYSO also started me on that path of realizing that media can make a difference. You know, media can make a difference, that people hearing things, seeing things, can affect the way they think and see the world. I mean, I saw that with what we did in the spring of 1970 with how we help people understand the student point of view, let's say, on campus protest, on why we were opposed to the war. So WYSO helped me see that there was power in this medium.
Jim, what are you thinking?
I'm glad you had me wait till after that, because that tape said a lot of the things I was going to say. But let me just add a little to that. I came to Yellow Springs and Antioch in 1967, and I was a music major. And Jay, you know, he got me to do music for the student films he was making, but then he told me all about radio, and I sat at his knee literally while he edited tape. If he had gone into Dayton during the Martin Luther King assassination, the night of the assassination, there was rioting in Dayton, and he went to the police station and interviewed people when they came out of the police station having been arrested, and then talked to them really about Black power and Black issues and such. And we sat there and he edited this tape. Me and Julia wound up using this tape in our teaching for like 30 years afterwards. But that got me really excited, and I volunteered. And it's true, at that point, the station wasn't very active. Actually, the AM steam pipe radio still existed.
Still going on.
That was the interesting part of WYSO at that time. Yeah. Literally, the schedule was these 4 half-hour shows from the Collegiate Radio Broadcast Network, which were just dry as dishwater. They were just, that's not the expression, but they were just not interesting whatsoever. And then 2 hours of classical music with Dick Barden's voice doing the intro and the exit of each piece, which in my job I would record every day and then play the tape and then, you know, get the records going and do all of that. But at night, we would make all kinds of, you know, crazy, you know, very influenced by Bad Magazine. Saturday Night Live hadn't happened yet, but there was a British show that was similar to that at the time. And it was just, we would do soundscapes. Tim Mabey was a really close friend, and we would be there from like 10 at night when the radio station went off the air, because it was only on from 6 to 10 at that point, the FM. And we would just do all this different production and stuff, and meanwhile people would do things at night. And at the point where Dick left, he actually went to graduate school at Edinburgh, and students took over again. It was another era of students. You heard about how wild it got, and it really was true. The station was pretty much unlistenable at that point, you know. But the people on campus really enjoyed it and just found it really exciting. You know, there were probably some hippies out in the world, and there were a lot of hippies at that point listening, because, like, you know, you get stoned and you listen to this, like, whatever comes on, but nobody else would have had any interest at all. And that went on for several years, and I was training a lot of people at the station, even though I was no longer working there. I was very involved with the station. I remember there was a guy, Dale, who had a co-op job at the Crab radio station in Seattle, KRAB, and they had a thing called the Crab Nebula, which were a number of community stations. They were kind of parallel to Pacifica Radio in a kind of way. And he came back and he told me that he thought we should do fundraising on the air, that we should have, like, you know, auctions, and we should raise money there. And I thought it was the stupidest thing I ever heard in the entire world. I mean, I just told him, this is a stupid idea. Nobody's going to give any money to radio through, like, talking on the air. I was
Jim,
very smart at that point.
That's a really good jumping off point to let's move ahead, because all of those things did come to pass, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to move up now to play the next segment, which introduces us to a whole different cohort, which is volunteers who came. So you and Julia and a lot of students making a lot of wild stuff, but there were also people like Carol and Joanne, who were not students, who were stepping up to make programs because they were community members who cared about what was going on in the world. So let's play.
Let me just say that they were trained to do this by me and Julia. That they
Right.
took a class that we taught,
True.
and then they started doing this work.
Right. Yeah, right, right. So let's hear that. Let's hear this next segment then, and we'll hear from Carol and Joanne.
I'm Joanne Wallace, and I was at WYSO from 1969 when I started as a volunteer journalist and radio trainee and producer. I had no radio experience except that when I was in college here in the Bay Area, I discovered KPFA. And I was so thrilled. It was totally listener-supported. And many of the programmers on the air were volunteers.
I'm Carol Pearson. I started out at WYSO, was the first radio thing I ever did. And Joanne Wallace and I were both faculty wives at the time and started doing a news program. We'd drive up to Springfield and get the New York Times and then rewrite it so it worked on the radio station.
And one of the first volunteer things that I did was to volunteer to produce a nightly news program. It was a program modeled after what I had heard in news on KPFA. During the years that I was at WYSO, student programming was really exceptionally good. Musical interests that students brought into the station, in part because they worked and studied on a co-op program. And so every 3 months, students left the campus and went to their co-op work. And many of the students who worked with WYSO on their co-op programs went to other public radio stations and worked as interns and work-study students in those stations. And they brought back terrific music programming. And I can remember in particular the first reggae show that was new to the station and became very, very popular. And it was instituted by one of the students who had been in Boston, heard reggae music on the air, brought it back, and it was just a really terrific example of how students added a lot to the programming of the station. When the Kent State shootings happened in 1970, in the spring of 1970, there was across the country a student strike at many, many, many of the universities and colleges across the country. And community radio stations, public radio stations around the country, particularly those at colleges and universities, came together and decided to distribute and cooperate with each other in coverage of the strike and coverage of the protests around the Vietnam War.
The newsroom was all over the story, obviously, with Kent State. I mean, the whole college was just totally activated around that, around big demonstrations in Washington. And a lot of us who were at the radio station were activists as well. So we were very involved in being on top of things, having classes taught, workshops done on progressive issues.
And we did a lot of coverage during that period, both during the strike and afterwards as well. So there was a lot to report on and a lot to talk about on the air. And I think the energy that was evident both among the paid staff, the student staff from the college, and volunteers really ramped up during that period.
The public broadcasting funding at the federal level had been passed by that time, but it was almost all big university stations. And, you know, they were fine stations, but they were kind of boring.
The Corporation for Public Broadcasting sent one of their staff out to see the station and decide whether to recognize WYSO as a CPB-affiliated public radio station. They realized that the station was student-run, and they said to college administrators that they were anxious to give WYSO a CPB grant, but that the station must be professionally operated. And it was at that point that the college approached me and asked if I would consider becoming the station manager. And I did.
When Joanne became the manager of WYSO, there were 4 women managers in the entire system, and the public radio conferences were pretty much all white men in suits. And we were the hippies.
What did that mean for WYSO when it became affiliated with CPB?
Well, it meant that the station received an annual grant, which helped fund additional staff. CPB required that there be 3 full-time professional staff, and that the station be on the air a minimum of 18 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. Then, by being CPB qualified, WYSO was eligible to become a member of National Public Radio and to receive NPR's programming. And I can remember the day in 1973 when NPR programming became available to us.
We've been looking into the Watergate story again tonight.
All Things Considered was the program, the evening news magazine program that NPR produced at the time.
In the party's telephones. It's a story that disturbs the Republican Party. First of all, none of the charges and countercharges.
Putting that program on the air, in addition to the news and public affairs programming that WYSO was producing, gave the station a significantly new presence in news and information for listeners throughout the southwestern part of Ohio.
Can you kind of summarize how WYSO fit into the big picture? I have this theory, Joanne, about this late 60s, 70s student radio for the first time in American history, where people were empowered to make news, and it created a whole generation of media journalists and practitioners because of those experiences at places like WYSO.
It was happening all across the country in both small community and college-operated radio stations, non-commercial radio stations, where there was a real movement to create experimental, interesting, creative radio that went beyond a somewhat formal educational radio format that had been the tradition at particularly land-grant colleges, the small college-operated student stations that began to also attract community volunteers and then paid staffs were much more experimental and interesting in their productions, both music and news and public affairs. And the reason that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting told us that they were interested in qualifying WYSO and Antioch College to be CPB funded and recognized was that WYSO was seen as a very experimental, interesting station. And we were thrilled to be recognized. We were such a tiny station at the time. And as part of a community radio movement that was just emerging.
And it emerged. Joanne and Carol went on to have amazing careers in public radio. Joanne at NPR and KQED and KPFA and WGBH. Carol also at WGBH, KQED, and the National Federation for Community Broadcasters. So one kind of representing this real community ethos that WYSO still has, and one, the more NPR kind of public radio. And both of those people were here at WYSO. I think it's kind of remarkable. They're still good friends. I think they need to write a book. But what are you thinking about now, all these, now that you hear yourselves talking about the past? What's running through your mind, Carol?
Oh, well, this WYSO was absolutely the launch of just the most rewarding career that I could possibly have had. And I mean, it was early in the public radio system, and so actually the good thing was that you didn't have to have lots of experience to get jobs, because I went from WYSO, where we were like, I mean, we basically did everything. And I then moved to Boston and got a job as the assistant manager of WGBH Radio, which was one of the biggest broadcasting stations in the public broadcasting system. And then was able to go out to California and get a job at KQED as the assistant station manager again. And then
you felt qualified though, right? You knew what you were doing. You
I
had done
knew
a little
some
bit
of
of
what
everything.
I was doing.
Yeah.
I learned a lot on all of these jobs.
Yeah.
And I mean, at each job, I learned a whole new set of things, because I did a little of everything at WYSO. I became the operations director, basically, at WGBH. And then I became basically the program director at KQED, and then I became the president of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters and did lobbying. I felt like I was taking a civics class and learning how budgeting and everything happened at the national level. So, I mean, it's been such an important place for me.
And you would say the same, I think, Joanne, right?
Absolutely. You can hear my voice sort of choking up here. Let me just mention that Jim and Julia taught Carol and me audio production, what a microphone was, how to hold a microphone, how to cut tape with razor blades, quarter-inch recording tape, and some production. And this is when Carol and I both, we had met, we were both young faculty wives. Our husbands began teaching here, and we were wondering what in the world we, as individual people, were going to do here in Yellow Springs. And we met Jim and Julia, and both students here, and so enthusiastic about storytelling and radio and audio production, and that really launched us, I would say, in radio overall. WYSO also was, as you mentioned, Neenah, very much a part of a movement that included the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, and as we were here, the women's movement, which early on in the late 60s, and Julia was a huge part of our experience with that, but the women's movement also. And then the community radio movement. We felt ourselves to be part of a complementary part of these movements. So it was an incredibly exciting time. I'll just tell you one quick story about the college here asking me to become the station manager. And the college knew, because the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which really wanted to give a grant to WYSO, because they considered, CPB considered WYSO such an interesting, experimental, small, do-it-yourself radio station, in contrast to a lot of the land grant, Ohio State, for example, a much more interesting, young station. They asked me to become the station manager, and I said to the student station manager, Steve Lewis, who was on, as the college was attempting to hire a professional. And I said to Steve, I've not managed I've never been educated in broadcasting. I don't know FCC rules and regs, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, here are the FCC rules and regs, the enormous notebook. Here's the non-commercial section. And it is the radio section of the non-commercial section. Go home, read it, come back to me. Now, Steve is still the station manager. Come back to me. I'll answer questions that you may have. And I'll help you with the license renewal, he said. And that's how my work began. The station that I became the station manager of was incredibly interesting. It had lots and lots of volunteers. Its focus was partly Antioch, and there were a lot of Antioch producers, both in public affairs, but especially in music. But it was community focused as well, as Ed Richard focused on in his remarks. It was just an incredibly exciting place to be.
Yeah. Let's bring this to a close. And I'd like each of you to comment, if you would. Some of you are aware that the reason I brought the CPB into all of this was like the Public Broadcasting Act, 1967, right, created public broadcasting, public radio and public television, and it created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to administer the tax dollars, right? So CPB was an entity that, as Joanne says, approved all these stations. CPB was disbanded, right, last summer by the current administration. $1 billion was withdrawn that had already been allocated, was withdrawn from public broadcasting. So we, like every other station, were denied money that had already been allocated, and there will be no CPB allocation next year, as far as we know. So we're in a different world, right? All public radio and all public we're in a new world now without this federal money. So let's talk about like two things. We have this beautiful new facility, right? We have a burst of energy here at WYSO because of that. But around the country, people are really struggling to keep it together. So what can you, with your vast experience in public media, advice, thoughts, what do we do? Do we change anything? Do we keep moving ahead the way we have? What are we called upon to do now in this moment?
I think I'll just start. I think urgently we need to keep as many of the stations around the country operating and on the air. Now, I'm talking particularly about public radio stations, but public television as well. And our communities around the country really are coming forward and helping. The stations we worry most about are in rural parts of the country, tribal stations, and many of the rural stations actually are in red states across the country. But to lose a state, and some of the states are very vulnerable. Alaska is very vulnerable. Alabama, apparently to some extent for political reasons. Alabama could lose its public radio stations. Think of the national impact of local stations and national public radio and the BBC and et cetera, actually not being national if it doesn't have public radio in some of the states across the country. I worry hugely about that.
Well, they're not going to have any information during
emergencies, like when the electricity goes down and you can't get television and you can't get the internet, and I mean, they're absolutely critical, particularly in these rural areas where there may be no local newspaper, and it's just so important. And the trouble is, WYSO is lucky that you're you've got a big enough population that the population and local businesses can help support the station, plus the community just can be involved and supporting the station. But in a lot of these rural areas, there's, very few businesses, there aren't that many people, and they absolutely are dependent on these local public radio stations that are so critical. When I was working at NFCB, that was one of my main focuses, was making sure that, what I did a lot was try to get all these stations to get their local congresspeople and state representatives on the air so that they understood how important those stations were. But I think for all of these stations, that making sure that they really are involving the community in the ways that WYSO is. WYSO is, thanks to you in large extent, really important in bringing community voices onto the air and making sure that different people and different points of view are represented is going to make the difference in whether we survive or not.
Yeah. Jim.
On the less practical and more ethereal level, I just think the stations being really connected to communities and social movements is what will save them and keep alive. And part of me goes back to this point right before Neenah came. We had these sort of business interests at the university who really wanted to change the nature of WYSO, to change it so its financing would mainly come from the corporations in the area, and it wouldn't do anything that could offend anybody, and it was really like they had a whole different vision. And in fact, I want to point out that Ellis Jacobs is here tonight. He was on the hiring committee that hired Neenah, and it only happened because he's the kind of radical that he organized all the other people on this hiring committee, because the guy who was the financial head of Antioch University really didn't want this to happen. And when the committee was all set to hire Neenah, he tried to end the search and not have anyone being hired. And Ellis used all his skills. He was a public interest lawyer for years and years. He used all those skills to get people organized and put them in a position where they had to hire her. But that could only happen. And otherwise, the station would likely have died, because this broad support that had developed over these 20 or more years, from Joanne and Carol and such, was very involved in trying to keep the nature of the station. That was keep WYSO local, which was just a term. It didn't just mean local broadcasting, but it meant local control. And we put so much pressure on the college and the station, like in terms of the fundraising going way down. Some of the reason that did is because we sort of had a fundraising strike in a lot of ways, like that. And at first they hired somebody totally incapable of doing the job and stuff, and fortunately he left after about a year or two. And that's when they put somebody from Keep WYSO Local on the hiring committee, and that was Ellis, along with people from public broadcasting in Dayton who weren't like WYSO sorts, but they were smart people and a lot of ideas, and Ellis was able to work with them to save the station. I think something like that in some kind of form or fashion will happen in the next decade, a reformulation of control of voices. And, in terms of the form, that's kind of very who knows, because the nature of media is changing so drastically. but it will also always be communities coming together and people who want to improve the society and work together in movements that will make this kind of stuff happen. We sort of, in doing media, we support those movements, but those movements make it possible for us to exist, all of us, whether it's our filmmaking work or whether it's WYSO.
Thank you. Thank you all for your eloquence and your devotion and your sacrifice. Let's face it, right? Working in those years, it was not easy. It was not easy. It's almost 8:30, so we're going to bring this to an end and let you all have a chance to come and talk to these folks if you want. We also have refreshments, and if you haven't seen the building, please run around down in the base, in the lower level. We don't have a basement. Down in the lower level is the Center for Preservation, so named for Ed Richards. So please take some time and look around, and thank you for coming.